Wingin It Wednesday. All the panelists are here. Hey, that last group, it was 4 of them.
Yeah.
So you know what? I said, Bernie, it's got to be a 4-on-1 situation. I have no place to sit in this situation.
I'm sorry, man.
So anyway, we'll probably start there with our panelists, Warren Cottle, Stafford Barnett, and Carol Ross, all here.
Good morning.
Let's go ahead. I had this on the list, kind of a preview of what we're expecting in the fall. We know what was announced last week at a press conference, and the same group of guys here in with us this last segment. Warren, what do you think about the proposals? It seems like it comes to it's very interesting. It seems like it comes down to wants and needs, which might be the most subjective thing because it all depends on what the individual wants and or perceives that they need.
Yeah, they keep using phrases like mandates and needs and blah, blah, blah. And all of that is based on priorities. Some of it are mandated by the federal government, mandated by the courts or whatever. And those things, they can work themselves out. You're going to have to supply those one kind of way or another. The rest of this stuff, you got a budget, you got to make it work, fix it. And this is the most screwed up thing I've ever heard of in my life. I'm going to go back over it over and over and over and over again. They talk about the parish budget, the city's budgets, and all that. Show me one damn square inch inside these boundaries that's not located in Lafayette Parish. Show it to me, because I want to see it. Because, why do we send money to Baton Rouge? That's the state. We're not the state. We got our own government here. Quit sending money to Baton Rouge. That's the philosophy with them. Is, the parish is not us. The people that's not Lafayette Parish. They got the priorities wrong. Can we you want to discuss what's on the ballot for this fall? What's going to happen? Are we going to talk about the referendum that just took place?
Yeah, we're going to talk about that in the next segment.
All right, then I'm going to save my remarks.
Okay, Stafford, it seems like, this council represents areas that are outside of the actual Lafayette city, okay?
Right.
Does it come down to ultimately voting for what your constituents want? We heard Councilman Boudreaux talk about especially the library thing for his district. Are they voting based on what their district needs, and is that what kind of makes this whole thing difficult?
I mean, that's their job. They're district representatives. I mean, if they're not doing that, then they shouldn't be district representatives, period. Look, the fundamental problem that Lafayette has, and it's a parish problem and it's a city problem, is that we're a donor parish at the end of the day. We send more money to the state than they send back to us. So these taxes are collected, and then we have to go grovel back to the state and say, hey, can we please have our money back? Okay? And then when you get inside the city of Lafayette, it's the exact same thing. The majority of the money that's raised through property taxes in Lafayette comes from Lafayette. And then it's a lot of that money is spent outside the city of Lafayette. And then when we talk about how we're going to raise taxes or how we're going to raise funds, the cities don't want to expand until something good comes along, right? So look at Youngsville.
Annexation.
Youngsville has managed to successfully annex, or is fighting to annex, the Super One, right? Because it brings in sales tax, but still won't annex the library that's got a Youngsville address, right? So the problem that we have is that we need to go to a system, and I think the constitutional convention that's being thrown around right now is probably the best idea that allows us to make our own destiny instead of begging the state to say, hey, can you let us decide who we're going to be? Look, this past couple of elections, we've said kind of the same things to the citizens of our community, right? We've said we want to pay for, first we didn't want to pay for a jail, now we want to pay for a jail. First, and then now we don't want to pay for libraries, we don't want to pay for education, but we want to pay for a juvenile detention center, right? And so when we talk about what it is that we're saying to our people through these elections, I don't think we're telling a very good story about the future of our city. So the councilmen have a tough job. We've got a bad way of raising funds in the community, and when you talk about we lost $10 billion of our GDP, that is a lot of tax money that we've lost, and it's got to be made up somewhere. Just because we've lost, that's almost a quarter of our GDP, if not a little bit more. We didn't lose a quarter of the roads. We didn't lose a quarter of the responsibilities. We just lost a quarter of the income from that. So it's time for us to find a smarter way to start funding our government.
Carol, you've watched this for quite a long time with different councils. I don't know. Am I just wrong to think that this isn't a new problem? I mean, it is just something we can't seem to figure out.
No, and in terms of, at one time, you might have said we're a donor parish in terms of tax transfers, et cetera. But when you look at the number of facilities that are state-owned and get money from the state, the UHC, the university, the office buildings that are here that are owned and operated by the state, they pay a lot of. They bring a lot of money into Lafayette. So it's really hard to say now that that's a straight fact that we're a donor parish, because we do get a lot back from the state in terms of the facilities that are here, et cetera, personnel they hire, that sort of thing.
There's not a necessarily cash revenue, but that's...
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
Gotcha.
there are any number of ways to skin that cat, right?
Yep.
Because the state is too involved in local government, but we're still a home rule charter area, so that makes up for a lot. But I want to, when you're talking about these millages going forward, I got directly from the assessor the millages from 2007 to 2017 for all of the entities, the subdivisions within the parish of Lafayette. Let me say this. Now, the courthouse and jail, they say most of that money goes to the jail. In 2007, that's a 2.34 mil for the courthouse and jail currently. That in 2007, that collected 2.6 million. In 2017, 5.3.
You're talking about double.
Almost doubled, right about doubled, yes. Now, the detention center and correction facility, that's a 1.94 millage. In 2007, they were collecting 2.2 million. It's now 4.3. The amount of the millage doesn't go up, but the amount of property tax collected as we bring more properties online and new assessments, which have to be done periodically,
Yep.
the increase naturally goes up. So I would say those millages, they're coming at us in November. I think we need to take a careful look at all of them. I'm not necessarily saying no. I think we do have to look at these that are mandated by the state to fund. However, 2.94 mils, is that the right amount? And when you have a dedicated millage, let's face it, we've seen this over and over again. We saw it with the library. There's not enough oversight. They can pile up those fund balances, and they have a fund balance and will continue to have a fund balance. Not all of the funds are encumbered. Now, if you say going forward, this is what we had plans for, well, I had plans to take a trip around the world, but I'm not going to do that because I don't have the funding. So if they're saying all these things that they would like to have, all the want-to-haves, as to what's going to be needed to operate and to complete the Scott branch, and some of the things that they want to do, I think they're going to have adequate funding with 2 millages that produce quite a bit, over 10 million annually. So I think that's a pretty healthy amount for the library to have.
We're gonna talk about the library and recap on the election that we had this last weekend, including the 8% voter turnout, which is definitely a problem.
That's the sad
that
part.
we have. All right, it's 7:17 now on Wingin' It Wednesday. Stay with us. We're back after this.
It's Wingin' It Wednesday, driven by Service Chevrolet Cadillac.
All right, we move on down the list of topics we had for today's Wingin' It Wednesday show. Ever gracious to our panelists who wake up early each and every Wednesday to be here with you. And look, it takes all opinions, all perspectives, all priorities to make this station go around, to make this show happen, and to make this hour the most listened to radio in all of the universe. I can say that, right?
I like that.
You have data to show that?
Just about as real a data as we have. So there you go.
In
Hottest
his
hour in
mind.
radio.
In his mind.
Okay, so we'll go on down the line. Stafford, we'll start with you this time. We had an 8% turnout this past weekend, and it seems like even if the people just on my timeline and on the KPEL timeline just went to vote, even if we would have just gotten those few people together,
Right.
it would have been more than 8%.
Yeah. Yeah.
So people just Facebook concerned?
No, I think there's a lot of regret. I think that there's a lot of people who said, hey, we wish we would have gone to the polls and shown up. There was a lot of excuses made for why they didn't. They said they weren't informed. They said it was festival. They tried to blame it on the city, saying that it was festival, the city's fault. In reality, the city doesn't set election days. But look, there's a couple of things that we need to talk about when it comes to the library. Okay, so the library system in Lafayette is the bootstraps of society. Okay, so when people come out and say they need to pick themselves up by their bootstraps, this is usually where people start. When you're unemployed and you don't have internet, and you've got to go fill out that application online, which is for just about every job now, where do you go? You go to a place where you have access to a free computer and free internet. And look, it's not free, right? In 1.48 mils, which is what they were pulling. So we had a couple lies that were thrown out. One, they said it was a tax increase. It wasn't a tax increase. It was the same thing that was on the ballot from last time. The council just elected to not roll it up from 1.48 to 1.61. 1.48 mils. If the average home price in Lafayette is $175,000, you get the first $75 of your $1,000 off, right? So you're getting taxed on $100,000. It's $14.80 a year. Okay. So if you have an average home in Lafayette, you were paying a little over $1 a month to have access to a library. But more importantly, you were paying for that money for your neighbors to have access to that, right? And so there's a couple of things that we've said to our neighbors and to our weakest over the past 2 years in this community. We've said that we don't care about these people. And you can say whatever you want, and you can make whatever defense you want, and you can try to hide behind this shield of good governance. But at the end of the day, your story is completely interpretable. And it's interpreted as, we don't want to put people in new schools that our parents paid for us, right? That's the reality is. Somebody else made this sacrifice a long time ago. Those schools were new at one point.
Let me stop you, and then I'm not going to stop your clock. But on the basis of the average home price, the people that are hit hardest, it seems like, are the businesses who might have a $5 million building, who might have a $10 million building.
100%, right?
Okay.
And those businesses and companies are staffed by employees in the community, right? It's not just by the individual owner. And to pretend that the individual owner is the only person that can make it happen without the support of the people that are in there is a fallacy. Okay?
But then there are the remainder millages, though. This was the third. The other two remain.
You're right.
And the other two bring in about $10 million a year.
And so if we took a look at the budget and we said, okay, they'd have a reserve fund of $42 million, 39.6 of that is planned out for future development. And this was something that was put together in 2008 when we said our library system needs to be expanded, right? So the citizens of the community came together and said, let's put a library in Youngsville. Let's put a library in Scott, which we tore one down in Youngsville. We put a new one in Youngsville. And let's be honest, it'd be annexed by now if it raised sales taxes. And we're going to continue to try to put them in places where people who need them are affected. We made the one in Lafayette downtown significantly better. And that services a lot of people, and a lot of people who may not have books at home, who may not have access to internet. And so my point is that when we say no to this stuff, we're saying no to a lot of people. And I'll just point out something else. If you look at where the school tax and where the library taxes failed, I'm not going to say that the library tax failed because of Youngsville. The school tax failed partially because of Youngsville. It failed in Lafayette too. I think it was 51-49, somewhere around that. It's a great example of bad governance right now and what's wrong with consolidation. They've got $8.9 million. Youngsville alone has got $8.9 million in planned construction to help in flooding in the first and second phase of the projects. They've got $9 million that came out of the public health fund. That was an actual surplus. They're taking $8.9 million of that $9 million to do project in Youngsville. It's time for us to deconsolidate.
Okay, so Carol, we've talked to people. Even you just look at the vote, even with the 8% that showed up, it's not like it was a blowout in either direction. There are a lot of people who feel like we pay enough. There are a lot of people who feel like, well, I've already been paying it, so what's the difference? We talk about adding a human to the election. When we have this congressional election in the fall, we're going to have huge turnout. Mm-hmm. Is it more important for both sides to get the message out? Because one side was organized and the other side was not. Where are we in the balance?
Let me put it this way. One side had the media on their side and got all of the coverage. And the other side really, besides running some ads on KPEL and our sibling stations and a couple of mailers, that was about it. Any press release that was sent out was completely ignored by most of the media. And so it was a little bit tilted, so we had to speak back. When you don't have an equal access to the public voice, thank goodness for KPEL and our sibling stations, and for those people who put out their money. And by the way, in terms of that dark money, how shameful is that, calling local people dark money? If they want to protect their donor list, just like millions of other organizations do because they don't want their donors harassed, which they would have been, because if you've seen some of the comments on social media from the other side, we tried to keep it very much on a high level and strictly
it was
talk
ugly on
about
both
the
sides.
numbers.
We have to admit it was ugly on both
Well,
sides.
I didn't see that because I don't do that kind of social media. In my perspective, and what I tried to do was, yes, we need libraries. Yes, we have funded libraries. I was around and supported that tax. I helped get that third tax passed in order to build the libraries because we saw the need back then. Gail Smith was in charge. She did a hell of a job, really, getting that tax passed in a very anti-tax atmosphere. You think it's bad now. Try when everything was in the tank back in the bad 80s.
In the 80s, yeah.
That's exactly right. And so I think most people saw it from my perspective, right-sizing the millage. When you see the needs we have across the parish, you just had those guys in here talking about it. All right, why should the library be able to build up a fund balance that no other division of government has? And that was the point I wanted to make. When you have, I know people like dedicated because they want to make sure it's going where it's supposed to go. However, these kinds of things that are governed by independent boards, et cetera, there's not a lot of oversight from the overall governing body, which is LCG. And so a lot of times these things get out of hand. But if you look at the percentages, all right, I think the margins of all the millages tell the story. People were paying attention. They said yes to the juvenile detention center.
By far.
They said yes to recreation. That was the next highest, 63 to 37 for recreation. But roads, 68 to 32. Yep. Are they telling you what they want done? They want the infrastructure in this parish fixed.
So there's an old country song, Warren. I'm going through the big D and don't mean Dallas. I think one we don't mean is, what is it? What is it called? Where
Deconsolidation.
Not deconsolidation. Gosh, Rob, you got so excited by your own joke and you
we should
forgot
talk
it.
about
Or did you talk about
Dedicated.
Dedicated.
All right.
You've been a very patient man
Yes, I
here for
have
us.
been. And so for the adult viewer in the room, I want to say this, is that this election, this campaign should be a textbook example that should be taught in every marketing course there is. It should be taught when you're in public relations. It should be taught of what not to do in any political campaign. Any political consultant, campaign manager worth their salt will tell you, rule number one, when you start a campaign, do not prove your negatives. Mm-hmm. You know, if they say that you're a no-good, wife-beating drunk, you know, for God's sakes, don't get arrested for domestic violence and be intoxicated when they lock you up. And that's what happens. And so what was the negative in this campaign? The negative was they don't need the money. That was a big deal. They don't need the money. So what did the library group, those people who were pushing that, what did they do? They proved that they did not need the money. And I know somebody who either serves on the library board now or did serve on the library board who did not vote, who voted against that deal the other night simply because they don't need the money. Now, whether they need the money or whether they don't need the money, that I'm not arguing that. But the point was, in that campaign, you had one group who was completely silent, and what did they do? They came back and attacked the people who were out there who were opposed to it. You know, it's the same thing with the Clinton campaign, calling them baskets of deplorables and ignorant, and you don't know what you're doing, you don't care about the kids, and blah, blah, blah. And the Stafford says, you know, this is the future. And this. So what did the library say? Well, we need this money. To do what? Oh, we have these programs. We got to buy books. We got to buy computers. We got to do this. Well, you got the money now. Why in the hell aren't you doing it? And well, we are. But, you know, but we can do more. Well, you got $38 million. Why aren't you doing more now? And they didn't come up with it. They just kept saying, we just need the money. And you know, they never said, we don't have enough money. They basically went ahead and said, we don't need the money, but you still should give it to us.
You know, we have seen a statement already from library director that says, you know, in the days after, no services will be cut, no layoffs will happen, etc. And I thought it was a very classy statement because a lot of directors of organizations like that will use that opportunity to make people who voted against their renewal feel crappy. And you know what? She said, we're going to continue to do what we've always done, going to find different ways to do it. The mission is so important to us, we're going to find a way. Stafford, you can respond, and then we'll wrap up with Carol.
I think there's a couple of important things to bring up about that. I agree with you. I think it was a classy thing to say. I think what the voters told the the governor or the governing bodies of Lafayette is that if you raise funds responsibly, which these guys don't bond out, right? So they're not making payments to interest. They're using what they consume, right? What they take in. That if you don't spend that money, we're going to rip that away from you, right? And I'll go back to what was said in the last hour. This wasn't money that wasn't allocated or planned to be used, and so what we've decided to do is we're going to be cutting back on expansion. And so there's a great lesson to be learned here because we always forget about history. There's a reason our schools are down in the dumps, and it's because in the 80s we had a very large property tax that we decided to let roll away. That property tax was around for 50 years. It built 50 schools in Lafayette Parish in 50 years, and we let it roll off, and we haven't tried to get it back, and we stopped building schools instantly. And the communities that have gotten the schools, Youngsville, they're the first high school built in forever, and they got a charter school. Turn around and say we don't want to pay it back. If they had to buy that school from Lafayette tomorrow, if they went and formed their own community, 42 mills for 20 years to be able to afford that school. I don't see them doing that.
Yeah,
time to deconsolidate.
Some of the comments that Stafford made about not wanting to help people in certain parts of the community bootstrap themselves, and the library is the way for them to bootstrap themselves. But I would remind everyone that there are lots of ways that we spend our tax dollars to bootstrap people, and that is with the educational system. We spend a lot of money there. In certain areas where they do have extra needs, there's Title I. The Louisiana Workforce Commission, they offer things. The South Louisiana Community College, there are scholarships, there are grants. We have lots of ways of helping people bootstrap themselves. And by the way, we still have 2 property taxes to fund the library. Wants and needs are 2 different things. Whether they get all the wants that they have, they will get all the needs that they have. But whether they get all the wants that they have, that's another matter. And why? This is one agency of government. And I like I said that all along. And I said I like the library people. I know a lot of them, and they're good people. That is not the issue here. The issue is strictly a monetary issue. And by the way, in terms of rededication, I say we rededicated it back to the taxpayers, and they'll make the best use of it.
I'm pretty sure you opposed the last education tax as well, correct?
Yeah, and look at what they're doing now, because they have all the money and they're building the schools, aren't they? They didn't
only
need that.
Only one place. They haven't been able to do anything with the last one.
No.
All right, Warren, wrap this one up.
Well, that's their problem. That's a choice that the school board made.
A couple of things right quick. One is the money spent on education does not correlate into better education. If it did, New Orleans, Detroit, and Washington, D.C. would have the best schools in the world. But going back to what Stafford said, which I agree with, but people want you to spend that money because if you don't spend it, then they say, well, you don't need it, so we're not going to give it to you the next time. I was in a meeting one time with the Mike Francis, who at the time was the state chairman of the Republican Party, and they said that we had in Lafayette Parish Republican budget, bank account, we had whatever it was, $10,000 or $15,000. He said, that's not right. He said, you shouldn't have money in the bank. He said, you need to take that money and go out there and do the things you're supposed to be doing with it, whether it's voter registration or whatever it is. He said, just like a church should not be hoarding money. He said, you have some of these churches sit there and they're proud of the fact they got a $40 million endowment. They got this, they got that. He said, how much good could they be doing in a community if they were out there spending that money doing what they're obligated to do? And that's kind of the way I look at this thing. And that's the way the segments of government is. The police department, the schools, the library, whatever. When you got money for a specific purpose that you need to be out there doing what you're supposed to do with it.
You don't carpet the floors in the building doesn't have a roof, Warren.
Do what now?
You don't carpet the floors in the building doesn't have a roof.
I agree with that.
Okay.
And I also agree that you don't need to sit there and let your building get nasty, get dirty, and fall apart from a lack of maintenance.
Show me a Lafayette library that's falling apart.
I'm not.
Okay, thank you.
They have enough money. That's why they're not falling apart.
7:35 now. We're going to talk about income tax here in the state. It always comes up when we talk about a budget gap, which we have, and at last count, it's around $648 million. Where we move to close that gap and how it happens, we'll talk about that next on Wingin' It Wednesday.
All the action every week. Brought to you by Service Chevrolet Cadillac. Wingin' It Wednesday continues next. And now, your forecast from the KATC TV3 Weather Lab.
Partly sunny skies across Acadiana today. Look for your highs to get up to around 86 degrees. Moisture continues to pile up in the atmosphere with those winds coming in from the south. That pattern going to continue today, so expect it to remain very humid outside. Already feeling quite sticky early on this morning. Lows are going to be getting down to around 69 degrees later on tonight. Winds are going to persist in and out of the south at about 10 miles an hour. For tomorrow, highs back into the upper 80s. In fact, we'll stay in that range all the way through the rest of this week. Partly sunny skies today and tomorrow with mostly cloudy skies by Friday. This shower activity, though, that's going to be popping up by Saturday. Saturday, expect widely scattered showers with a 50% chance of rain. Looking a little bit better, though, for Sunday. And even a sneak peek into next week does mean it's going to be fairly quiet. However, it will remain warm and humid through the next several weeks. From the Storm Team 3 Weather Lab, I'm KTC meteorologist Daniel Phillips on News Talk 96.5 KPEL.
It's Wingin' It Wednesday, driven by Service Chevrolet Cadillac.
– 7:41 now at News Talk 96.5 KPEL. Love, we have little Wingin' It segments.
Within the wings.
Within the wings. Under the wing. Let's just call that the under the wing
That's
segment.
hilarious.
Winglets.
The winglets.
They're tasty winglets.
We
Someone
appreciate
called in one time, said need to change it instead of the winging it, need to change it to wing nuts.
Wingnut Wednesday.
We are totally the wing nuts.
Well, we'll call it that for this segment. Hey, Wingin' It Wednesday is brought to you by Service Chevrolet
Wingnut.
Cadillac.
Wingnut.
You know, it is my favorite week of the year. That is because the LADA car show is out there, and
Oh,
there's
yes.
about 2,000 reasons for me to be driving another car by the end of the week.
We were driving by and a friend of mine said, "What are all the tents for?" I said, "The car show's coming up.
It is the car show. Hey, Service wants you to see all that the Lafayette Auto Dealers Association annual car show has to offer. It started on Monday, goes through Saturday, May 7th, 9 a.m. until the last customer drives away. And if you're smart, it'll be in a brand new Chevy or Cadillac from Service. Admission is free and free parking. Find Service at spot number 3, Cajun Field. Best prices on brand new vehicles. Because look, it's an undertaking that takes about 3 days to get the cars over there. Trust me, they don't want to bring them back.
No, and they're going to
You know?
work that deal out, and they got that those financial people ready to roll. And
So what you need to know is I'm going to be out there on Friday morning. I'm doing the show from 5:30 to 9, and we might break a record this year. I might have a value on my trade by 10 o'clock. We'll see what happens. It's just what I like to do this week of the year.
the boy loves
You going to
him
sell
some
your car again?
cars.
I think, I
You
don't
going
know.
to sell it again?
Maybe. We'll see. See what happens. Anyway, our panelists are here. Carol Ross, Stafford Barnett, and Warren Cottle. Really great group we have right now. I'm
Yeah.
loving it. Loving the conversations we get to have. In Baton Rouge, still working to close this budget gap. And yet another problem. It's not a new problem. It's just one that we have kind of failed to solve in recent years. So it looks like we're headed for another special session. And yesterday, the topic of income tax came up, as it always does, because people love to compare us to Texas, and they don't have state income tax. Anyway, Carol, where are we ending up on this? We hear that from Darden, at least yesterday, that the call for the special session will be broad, lots of different options, but obviously they can't discuss them right now.
Of course it will. It'll be broad. They'll be going for
Broad.
every dollar they can get from us to fill a budget hole that they still don't know what that hole is. They cannot decide on how deep the hole is with the Trump tax reform and the tax cuts going back to the state, not to the people. I think I'm with him on the income tax. I think you're taxing productivity there. I think I'm going to go with Warren and get a little more on the consumption side, maybe. But if we could get a break on the income tax side, that would be nice. It would be probably a fairer representation. Even though I used to think at one time the sales tax was kind of regressive, but really, if you look at it, you don't pay more than you can spend. In other words, if you spend less money, you pay less money, right? So that may be the fairest way to go. They're not going to decide on anything, and they're not going to tell us anything until the last minute, just as they usually do. Yep. And I read something on the what is it was a quote by somebody who's been an observer for a long time. The House sends a really good budget over. It covers all the bases, and it's nice and lean, and it gets over to the Senate, and it becomes this big porkish kind of thing that they load it up with anything they can, and then they send it back to the House and they jam the conference committee. So it's really hard to predict what they're going to do. They do have a lot of big decisions to make, but it looks like the House is holding the line. And I think the reason they're doing that is because they're going to start from that point. Everybody says, oh, it's so extreme. It's cutting this, it's cutting that. They know exactly what's going to happen. if they don't keep that extreme on this side, they know what's coming on the other side, and it's all taxes all the time.
So maybe a little bit of meat in the middle.
Correct. I think that's what they're holding out for, and I think this little kabuki dance with the hospitals, the charity hospital, the partner hospitals, let's put it that way. They've gone through this at the last Edwards. It was the dialysis machines they're going to shut off the dialysis machines if we don't get this money. So now it's John Bell Edwards saying the hospitals will go away and all that. That's not going to happen. But David Calicott makes a very good point. This is no way to run a railroad. Mm-hmm. And they need to have some planning. Thank you, Bernie. They need to have some planning, long-term planning, to be able to understand. Yeah. And they do it at the hospital, and he does a great job. And by all accounts, they've been doing a great job. Mm-hmm. And I think his point in jamming it like this is saying, you want to play this game? We can play this game, too.
Warren, what do you think is going to happen?
In the end, UMC will still be open.
Correct.
Lafayette General will still be here. Lourdes
Correct.
Hospital will still be operating. And, I might still be alive. I don't know. But, as we go through this over and over and over, where they, both sides, either side, the three sides, whatever, they're always preaching doom and gloom. Give us more of your money. If you don't give us more of your money, it's your fault. And it's your fault. It's your fault. And, that I'm so sick and tired of hearing Jay Darden come up and say about what has to happen. Let me be on the show sometime with Jay Darden when he's in here. He wants some. Where are you going to cut? Show us your cuts. Show us your cuts. I would welcome the opportunity to sit down with as Moon calls him, co-governor Darden, and let's discuss where we're going to cut. This stuff, and I think it is basically, I don't know if it's well known or not, but I understand that letter that came out about we're going to lay off 800 people or whatever it was, is that basically that letter came from the governor's office and said, this is what we need put out there. And that's what happened. So, it's the same old ploy that happens all the time. Mm. And, look, I've been in Louisiana now. I wasn't born here, but I've been here now for 37 years. And, that's longer than some people have been alive. And that, you see this time and time and time and time again. It's like watching a soap opera. The woman stays pregnant for 7 years. It's the same old thing over and over and over, so.
Look, I've covered state legislature in 3 states. And when people ask me, like, so did the same stuff happen in Texas? Did the same stuff happen in Georgia? And you're like, actually, legislative sessions are quite boring because they almost never have to deal with budget issues. They get to deal with other things.
Yeah, but you know what the big difference is in so many of those states is that, that Jay Darden said that it's going to be broad. Well, in so many of those states, that word took care of a lot of those problems, and they got passed around by the lobbyists and by the legislators themselves, and blah blah blah. So
we just can't figure out whether it's the high papalorum or the low papalorum.
There you go.
Yes, you are a younger guy. You have a young family. The one thing that I keep hearing with people who are frustrated about Baton Rouge is, do we just need to leave the state now? And
it's already happening.
Right.
And look, I can tell you there are people who are leaving because of our stance on education in the parish and our stance on libraries. I've seen it happen, and it's happening.
Since Sunday, they already got their U-Haul lined up.
Have you not seen the Lafayette exit?
I'm just saying. I mean, I've read it.
Okay.
But.
It's coming. So I want to point out something, though. Warren jokes about being old and being alive to see this stuff. Look, I'm 95% sure that Warren's a Highlander, and that the only way he'll ever die is if another Highlander comes along and they fight with their Highlander swords.
That is exactly it. And look, he's laughing in that maniacal way.
I'm pretty sure he's
actually
born
119
in the mountains in the hills of Scotland.
I think so.
600 years ago.
Oh, I agree.
Yeah,
it's true.
Well,
yeah,
we owe him for some of the recipes for ale that have been passed down for generations. But look, my point is that you can't cut your way to prosperity, and the state, I've said this before and I'll say it again, we send them there to do the tough stuff, not the easy stuff. And they've got to figure this out, period. Our current system of taking in revenue and turning around and giving it out is broken. And we see that in our tax elections because we keep having to constitutionally protect everything to keep it from getting touched. So we have to go make a constitutional amendment just about every year, every other year to say, hey, leave this money alone. Leave our coastline money alone. Leave our middle education alone. Leave our hospitals, whatever it is. Instead of going, hey, we have a 3% budget shortfall this year, cut everything by 3%, right? So we've got to make some common sense moves, and the only way we can start doing that is to say our Constitution is broken, it's time to scrap it, and to start from the beginning. We've got multiple bills in Baton Rouge right now to do that, and we have a way to truly solve our problems. But these guys have to do the hard work first.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. We're going to come back with a rare national topic. White House Correspondents' Dinner, funny or nah?
Oh, boy.
Hilarious.
Hey, it's 7:51 now at News Talk 96.5 KPEL.
It's Wingin' It Wednesday, driven by Service Chevrolet Cadillac.
All right, it's 7:53, and relatively unknown except to certain people, comedian was the headliner of the White House Correspondents' Dinner. Obviously, look, it's always kind of somewhat of a roast, but a lot of people think it went a little bit too far. Warren, we'll start with you on this one. Thoughts? Is this just kind of another place to make your name, or what's your thought?
Well, you know, I first heard about how horrible this gal did and whatever, and how much she crossed the line and all, and so I said, you know, I'm not going to watch this stuff. So, but then I finally decided to watch it. So I watched it, and a lot of her jokes I didn't really catch because they were edited out or, you know, bleeped or whatever. So then I went and got the
unedited version?
Unedited version.
Raw.
The raw version, and it was pretty raw. I would say this, that she told several that I thought were funny.
Yeah, I did too.
You know?
Sorry, that slipped out.
Trump was in touch
apologize.
with Russia, but Hillary couldn't call Michigan.
That's right.
That's a really funny
that
joke.
was, you know, so she, you know, I think that she did go over the line when she started talking about Sarah saying, you know, they're doing a real personal attacks there with somebody who really wasn't part of that deal. But other than that, you know, that she made some pretty good things that if it had been a different little venue, she would have gotten standing ovations for some of those things. When she said about Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan, that if 90% of the Republicans would have stood and applauded that for a long time, and then when she said something about Al Franken got thrown out for sexual harassment, you know, she said, and that hurt. And Ted Kennedy said, that's crazy. I murdered a woman. You know, that there were so many of those things that she came up, you know, that she said that you know, they were pretty rough, but you know, but she was kind of like Richard Pryor and Eddie Murphy.
Yeah.
Now you can say, yeah, but Richard Pryor and Eddie Murphy never would have been up there. Why not?
Yeah.
There was their crowd out there.
It's a level of, I think you brought up a perfect thing, venue. You know, I mean, I think this is nothing any worse than what's on an HBO special or whatever. But however, a lot of your people who you would think, or a lot of people love to say, they're in the can for the Democrats, came out and said, this was too far even for us. Stafford.
I think Michelle Wolf should do it every year. I think that was absolutely hilarious. I think it was the roast everybody up there deserved. Look, the press makes money on the backs of people's emotions, and they do it. CNN's got breaking news. Fox has got breaking news. They've all got breaking news all day long. And what you're seeing now from people who say that she went too far, it's just recreational anger. It's snowflakes going, you crossed the line. But they're silent when the president gets on Twitter and calls Rosie O'Donnell fat. But, you know, the lady said nothing about anybody's bodies or anything. She made some funny jokes. When she said that Sarah Huckabee Sanders was the white female version of an Uncle Tom, like everybody find somebody who's happy with what she's doing. I fell out of my chair laughing. I thought it was hilarious. So look, yes, she made some jokes that offended some people. Get over it. She's a comedian at a comedian's event. And look, I want to point something out. Only 2 presidents since this event has started have missed it, right? Trump has refused to attend it since he's been elected, and Reagan missed it once. because he was in the hospital for being shot, right? If you want to dish it, take it. Be a pro.
Carol, does it deserve a reform? The White House Correspondents' Dinner?
Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn.
You don't care,
I
yeah.
really don't care. There are a bunch of jerks up there anyway,
Very
all
good,
of them.
very good.
On one side or the other. Why would I waste my time? I've seen enough of the clips to know that she's not funny. She's just not funny. I mean, in my opinion,
Yeah.
she's not funny. Billy Crystal would have done great. You know, somebody like that. Even Eddie Murphy or Richard Pryor. I mean,
Yeah.
He's dead.
you wouldn't have been able to. You wouldn't
That
have been
would
able
have
to.
really been entertaining.
He would have done great because he was really funny.
I was gonna
but
say-
the only thing that happened with Richard Pryor is he used the F-bomb too much and it got in the way of his jokes because he was a really funny guy.
Yeah.
Chris Rock is hilarious. Chris Rock could have done a fun job and not been as stupid and vitriolic as Michelle Wolf was. I mean, these people, they just talk to each other and, you know, they just blah, blah, blah each other and who cares?
Yeah.
I
All
don't
right.
think you've seen enough Chris Rock. Go watch the first episode of The Office, and then you'll realize
Oh,
where
I
that
think
joke
I
comes
know
from.
a lot about Chris Rock.
You got to realize he was.
Do not
he
make
put some
assumptions,
lines.
my friend. Do not make assumptions.